It's another exciting, bright new week. 4 more discussion topics selected by you. A whole new conversation. It's episode 17. Welcome back to 360 Speedway. Welcome along to 360 Speedway HQ. Another week in life successfully negotiated. Time then for a fresh new episode of enjoyable, hopefully, fingers crossed, Speedway discussion. Let's do exactly that. Make yourself comfortable. Okay, another new week, a whole new conversation. Time to introduce, as we always do at this point, this week's lineup. Okay, so first off, he's been rested for a week. I don't know what he got up to, but he's rested last week, desperate to get back into hard-charging action once again. Yorkshire's finest, let's welcome back Crabby, NIGEL CRABTREE. Good evening, Nigel. Welcome back to the 360.
Hey, Derek, you all right?
Very well, thank you. We missed you last week, Nigel.
Oh, listen, I'm sure not.
Nigel, I don't know if you can see behind me, Nigel, but 36 Ty has got a little message, a little text message. Anyway, next up in the lineup tonight, making another very welcome return to the 360 Speedway fold. The man who has done more laps of the National Speedway Stadium than anyone else, Mr. John Deere himself, or given his real name, it's Andy Meredith. Welcome back, Andy. Good to see you.
Hi, folks. Hi, Derek. You okay, mate?
Would you answer to John Deere, Andy?
New Holland at Bellevue.
Answer to that, okay. And completing
John Deere, Glasgow.
Thank you. And completing this week's team, his Speedway needs a Barry Hearn and his former feud with Neil Collins have given him the top 2 most watched video shorts on the 360 Speedway YouTube channel. Expect some big opinion once again from Big Mac, Stewart McDonald. Good evening to you, sir.
Evening, Derek. Evening, 360 team. How are you?
All good. We're ready to go once again. Collectively, this week's Handlebar Heroes for episode 17. The usual disclaimer that all views and opinions expressed by us as individuals are those of us as individuals and not necessarily any relation or any bearing to any of the clubs that we are or are formerly associated to. Okay then, let's get on with the action. Fans Pulse Lap 1. First of all, I hope you enjoyed our extended conversation last week with Hans Nielsen. Wasn't he fabulous? He was great company, he was great value, he showed a great sense of humour on camera and off. And if you haven't yet had a chance to sit down and watch back our interview with Hans in full, remember there's 2 parts to it. Please make some time over the weekend, pour yourself a drink and sit down and just listen to the legend talk about his memories and his insight on the world of Speedway. Okay, let's move on to this week then. Episode 17. A whole new week, a whole new conversation. If you're sitting comfortably, let's get stuck into Fans Pulse Lap 1. So over the years, and it continues today, we have occasionally, guys, seen the emergence of a young rider, perhaps with a famous surname, who has been a standout talent right from the off, naturally gifted, well equipped, and with that professional temperament that all successful riders need. And sometimes you see that a 16-year-old kid come along and he mixes it with the big boys and belies his youth and lack of experience in the sport. So we want to talk about those individuals, or some of them at least, who have made the quickest rise to Speedway stardom. Guys, I'm sure we'll talk about some particular names as we have this conversation, but I just wanted to ask your opinion. Stuart McDonald, I'll ask you first. How do you explain that phenomena in Speedway? Is it nature? Is it nurture? What is it, Stuart, that explains the raw talent of a 16-year-old to compete with the best in the sport?
I don't know. What was it like, Nigel?
I was no talent at 16, no 26 or 36, Stuart, so I don't know.
Do you know, Derek, I think to hit the ground running when you're 16 as a speed rider, in any league, I think you've got to have a special talent. I don't care what anybody says, it's natural. I think when I was at Glasgow, I think it was 1988, 89, or maybe 89, I think it was, and I remember watching the Inter-Cup Challenge, and it was Glasgow versus Bellevue, and there was a 16-year-old rider that night that was just an absolute phenomenon, and that was Joe Screen. Right from the off, Joe's first match, I think he scored like 8 or 9 points. I didn't know much about the background. I know that Nigel had a bit of history in that sort of side with him, but I think that when you look at Joe Screen when he started out, was just from the get go. As soon as he turned 16, he was just a phenomenon, and then to go through his career the way he did. Another one that we probably didn't mention about not winning the World Championship. He won the World Under-21s, the British finals, the Inter, you name it. But I think Joe Screen, even to the day that he retired, I think was at Glasgow, I think, Derek, when he finished.
Yes.
What a rider, what a talent. And to look at what he achieved, he should have been world champion without a doubt. That style of his was just another level. The old leg trailing style, which we don't see a lot of in Speedway now. But what a rider. And there's another one that I remember that I'm actually still quite friendly with today on Facebook, and when we see each other, is David Howe. You remember David Howe? I watched him as a 15-year-old round Powder Hall, and he was getting lap times similar to Les Collins, and that was as a 15-year-old. And then again, when David turned 16, he was another one. Phenomenal, I just don't know why David never got to that height, because from the get-go again, phenomenal. I think 16, he made his debut. I think he rode in a couple of Elite League matches quite early on, and he was holding his own. I remember it. It's a long time ago, but they were two riders that stood out for me. Joe should have been world champion, and David Howe certainly should have possibly, I think, achieved a little bit more. Obviously, injuries hurt the both of them dramatically, when that was one of the reasons I think that a couple of them never got to the sort of world championship stage, if you like, to winning it. But they were two riders that I thought from the get-go were just phenomenal and just natural riders.
Good pick, Stuart. Stuart, Nigel, what's your opinion on this? Nature, nurture, a bit of both, horses for courses?
Well, I have to agree with Stuart. I think the main one over the years was Joe. I don't know if I've said this on here before, but I can remember Joe coming to Stoke to a practice when he was like 15 years old. And he used to come, because this is all they could afford, in an old beat-up, clapped out, I think it was a transit van, and his bike, I am joking when I say there was like Baylor band holding bits together. The bike was absolute junk, really, but it's all they could afford. And his van was the same. They just couldn't afford it. But Joe rode that bike. How it kept going for 4 laps, I'll never know, because he just, at 15, he just wrung its neck around Stoke. And he was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the quickest ones, I believe, to come good like he did. There's the Morans, isn't there? Another one, a good friend of mine, was Kenny Carter. Kenny had so much determination, and do you know what else he had? That Yorkshire grit.
Yeah. And speed.
You know all about that, Stuart, anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Your lads.
Scottish, Nigel, they're Scottish, come on now.
But no, Kenny Carter was another one. You could see Kenny, he was so determined, and Kenny didn't care about anything. Wasn't bothered about being mates with anybody. All Kenny wanted to do was be the world champion and be the best. And it was very sad and awful what happened with Kenny and his wife. Terrible. But going back to Joe, I don't want to down Joe at all, because he had so much talent and ability and should have been a world champion. Without a shadow of a doubt, Joe Screen was good enough to have been a world champion on more than one occasion, I think. The problem with Joe was he wanted to enjoy himself as well, I think. That's not to say he wasn't dedicated, but maybe he wasn't quite dedicated to be a world champion. But without a doubt, he was one of the best, one of the quickest. And like Kenny, Kenny was totally different to Joe. He had his mindset on. He wanted to be world champion. I don't know whether Joe wanted to be world. Yeah, probably wanted to be world champion, but Joe wanted to enjoy himself on his way through as well. Maybe you can't just maybe enjoy yourself as much as Joe wanted to and be world champion, as I think your Hans Nielsen that you had last week, Eric Gundersons, all them lads, Tony Ricardson. I don't know. They were all multi-times world champion, and I don't know. It was a shame Kenny couldn't. I think that was maybe one of Kenny's problems. Had it have been anywhere else in America, he'd have won it that year.
Yeah.
But, you would be a brave man to exclude Bruce Penhall in Los Angeles, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Totally wrong.
Andy, from a supporter's point of view, there's very few things in Speedway more exciting to watch than a young rider make the grade, especially one who hits the track running literally, from the debut meeting. And we've seen riders over the years who've done that. Jason Crump, to name but one. Woofy did that as well. When he started out, I just wonder though, from this might be slightly controversial, but for more established riders who perhaps didn't have that natural ability and have had to graft hard to scratch a living at Speedway or be a quality rider, might there be some resentment, Andy, some natural resentment of a young up and coming rider who can mix it with them after just 5 minutes?
I wouldn't say resentment as such. I think you always look up and you always respect the person who you're riding against, what age they are. But obviously you don't want the little, upstarts, if you like, getting one over on the next rider. But, going back to what, Crabby and Stuart were saying there, I agree with them totally. Joe Screen's right up there for me as a natural talent, he was just... At 15, 16, he just seemed to put the bike in the right place, do the right things on the bike, and he was a phenomenal. When he burst onto the scene, 100%.
Do you know, as I was doing a little bit of thinking, a little bit of prep, only a tiny little bit of prep for this episode, I scribbled down some names out of my head, and I've got down there Javi. I remember seeing Javi as a 16-year-old kid, and by crikey, he was impressive. Jason Crump we've touched on already. Woofy did it. Hans Nielsen back in the day. Hans talked about coming over to Wolverhampton when he was a 17-year-old kid, and in his first season recording a 7.5 point average in the British top division. Simon Steads, back in the day, I remember him as a 16-year-old kid. And going back a little bit further and using some Glasgow knowledge, I know that Jim McMillan went from a reserve number 7 to number 1 in his first season, which is absolutely bonkers when you think about it. Bobby Beaton, I think, did something similar. And just a couple more names that popped into my head. Jason Doyle, Darcy Ward, Lee Adams, Dan Bewley, of course, and maybe even a young Craig Cook. Craig landed in the crossed over from motocross into Speedway in the sort of mid-noughties, and instantly made an impression. Stuart McDonald, to bring you back in, is it possible, Stuart? Is there some risk involved in a young rider making that progress or that progression just a little bit too quickly? Are there some pitfalls and some dangers that a young rider would have to try and negotiate and avoid so that they don't become too disillusioned early doors?
Well, Derek, I think that if you can hit the ground running the way that sort of Joe did and some of the riders you've mentioned there at 16, Nigel mentioned this weeks and weeks ago about the apprenticeship, having to come through. If you hit your peak at 16, 17, it's difficult to keep that up for 20 years, 25 years. So there always is that problem that you could burn out. Maybe it would get too much for you emotionally. Maybe it would go to your head. One thing nowadays that the country's great at is really getting in the heads of young superstars. Anybody that's got a story, like journalists, and we talk about Luke Littler in the past as well, about his head at 18 years of age. And I think as long as you've got the right sort of surroundings, the right backings, we interviewed Dan Thompson, and what a lovely down-to-earth guy that seems to have all the right people around about him. And I think that at the age of 16, with the sort of level that we're talking about, the riders that we have, you need to have really good backing, sensible people around about you. And when you're 16, serve your apprenticeship in your own country, you know, go to Poland, go to Sweden when you're maybe 20, 21, 22. But I think that at that age, to keep that sort of level up, you would certainly need to have the right people around you and definitely have the right backing.
But Nigel, just to build on that, to develop that a little bit further, so, you know, those young kids who immediately make a big splash and they make everyone stand up and pay attention to them. I'm thinking of, you know, in recent years, Ashton Bowden, William Cairns, currently. Those tend to be the sort of riders who other clubs will try to slot in as a guest or maybe a double up, double down type scenario. And, you know, is it and from the riders' perspective, they're thirsty to experience all the tracks, to gain that experience. Obviously, they're thirsty to try and begin to earn some money from the sport, etc., and just generally to ride their bike to the maximum. But can, same question to you really, can there be some pitfalls of being too successful too soon, Nigel?
I think so. I always think the riders, and you had him on last week, Hans Nielsen, Eric Gundersen, plenty other ones, Tony Rickardson, they weren't world champions overnight. They built up, didn't they? Steady rather than spectacular on the world championship scene. They built up and they went up. Well, again, I got this thing, haven't I? You know, you've got to serve an apprenticeship because at 16 years old, I don't know, I'm agreeing with Stuart a lot tonight, which is most unusual, but you have to have the right people around you. If you haven't got the right people around you, you know, it can be a rocky old road. And I do think, you know, build up steady rather than spectacular. And the ones that build up steady, I seem to think, stop at the top longer. If you go up quick, I think you've just said it, Derek, haven't you? You know, you get good at 16, 17. By the time you're 20, you're fed up. And you haven't, you know, you've not really got the experience and everything. It takes years, doesn't it, to get the experience, to know all the pitfalls, all the downfalls, whatever. It doesn't come when you're 16 years old unless you've got some very good people around you. And you've already mentioned one. And where is he now? Ashton Bowden. Where is he?
Yeah.
You know, he's not even riding now. So, you know, he hit the scene, didn't he? Everybody wanted him at 15. They signed him at 16, whatever. 16 and a half year old or whatever he is now, and he's disappeared off the scene. You know, it's terrible shame. I just think the hunger, sometimes it comes all too easy for him. All too easy, you know. And I'm all for the English. I am all for the English young kids getting going, building up. But I think we've said it on here before, you know, when these Danes, the Aussies come over here, they have to get points to survive. Whereas our boys, me when I started, if I didn't get any points, I went home and my mum put me my tea on table following day, my breakfast, washed my clothes. Yeah. It was no problem. But some of these boys, when they come over, you know, they've got to get some points to survive. Yeah. Just to put food on the table. And I think sometimes we're not prepared to work hard enough at it sometimes, I do think, and we all want it to come too quick. Better off nice and steady and keep progressing and keep going, like, you know, my opinion. Might be wrong, but I'm agreeing with Stuart again, so I must be all right.
That's allowed. Andy, you know, we hear sometimes when a young talent, a raw young talent arrives at a club, we hear team managers say all the right things, you know, that we'll be patient with them, there's no pressure on them, we'll give them time, yada, yada, yada. You hear it a recurring number of times, but in the white heat of battle and in the white heat of trying to win matches and win trophies and things, inevitably team managers will look to even that young rider and put him under a little bit more pressure than perhaps you would ideally want to. But that's the nature of Speedway. It's a results-driven business, Andy, isn't it? And sometimes those niceties are left behind out of convenience of trying to win matches.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, a team manager's there to do a job as well, which is to make sure that the team can win. So his first point is really to try and sort of Make sure that the team is winning and everybody's riding to their full potential. I think that with the youngsters in the teams, they need to have somebody behind them, not just in the team manager, but somebody to oversee them, so that it keeps their feet on the ground a little bit, so that they're not being used, so that they're going out having a great meeting and then not having such a great meeting and then potentially out of a team the week after. So it needs somebody to sort of keep them, keep your feet on the ground. And as Crabby and Stuart says, having good people around them, that's the all important bit, really.
That is the key. Listen, 360 Speedsters, we mentioned a couple of names along the way in this segment, but if you personally enjoyed and watched a ride at your local track or your local team come through from being a raw 16-year-old kid and hitting the ground running, as we've mentioned, and going on to great things, perhaps not even necessarily to world championship level, but just to being a really competent, strong, consistent performer, then please get in touch and share some of your memories of that type of rider. Gents, I'm going to, just to before we end Fans Pulse Lap 1, I'm going to actually round off this segment. I was delighted, and I mean delighted, to receive a message from our furthest away 360 viewer, Al Priddy from North Island in New Zealand. Good evening, or good morning, good day even to you, Al. Al got in touch, and I'm going to bring on screen Al's message just now. There's a couple of questions as well, so let me just bring that on. So Al has been in touch, as I say, from the Bay of Plenty. It's a place I've happened to have been to. I've been to Bay of Plenty. It's a beautiful part of the world. And Al said, "G'day from New Zealand. Thought I'd drop you a message in the hope of a mention on your great show." Thank you very much. When you say great show, Al, you're guaranteed to get a mention. I have to say, I really enjoy listening to the old riders, that's you guys, talk about their times on track and the different questions that you ask. I emigrated to New Zealand some 19 years ago. I supported the Coventry Bees as my dad used to take me, going back many years. I was at the 1977 World Final at Wembley, but was only 3 years old at the time. Then went again to that classic 1981 final where Penhall beat the Bees hero Ole Olsen. My last meeting was at Brandon, September 2016, Bees versus the Aces, Knockout Cup final. I got my picture taken with Scott Nichols. Scott was only about 45 at the time, and that was my final time at Brandon. Al, some great memories of all things British Speedway, those World Finals in particular. I'm sure the memories will live with you forever. Al goes on to say, I do have a couple of questions for the riders, if you don't mind. So I'm going to ask you guys just to pick off these questions. Nigel, first one to you. The strangest thing, Nigel, that you have seen in a rider's contract?
That's a bit of a tough one. I don't really know, Derek. I don't know whether Stuart and Andy maybe know a bit more about this one. I don't know. I can imagine in one of the contracts, this is just a bit of a joke side of things, but when Kelly Moran rode for Hull, Kelly was terrible, but everybody loved Kelly Moran when he came over. I think that were everybody apart from Ian Thomas, and he did love him really, but the number of times, the police would ring Ian Thomas up and say, "Oh, we've got Kelly in the jail again. Can you come and get him?" And he was terrible. So I'm sure Ian Thomas must have had in Kelly's contract, "I'm not coming to collect you in the jail no more." I mean, he was just a fun guy, Kelly. He just loved people and people loved him. And he just loved having a good time, did Kelly. And I'm sure that weren't in his contract, but it could quite easily have been.
It could quite easily have been, Nigel, yeah. Andy, I'll ask you the next one. Does the home team pay both teams after each match? Or is the club you ride for that pays your wages?
It's the club that you ride for pays the wages, pays your home team. So your home team, home and away. So the away team is they're looked after by their own promotion.
Thank you, Andy. Big Mac, who owns the bikes? Does the club supply the bikes and frames, and the rider maintains it?
It depends on who you ride for. I know that in Poland they do, but I think this country there's maybe a couple of tracks that do it. I think there's Glasgow maybe one of the tracks that supply the bikes, I think.
No, not to my knowledge. No. I'm not aware of any British clubs that provide the bikes.
It was somebody had mentioned that they had rode for Glasgow, and I maybe get cross wires, but not the UK's. Definitely Poland, but in the UK I think the only times that the riders don't own the bikes is maybe if the sponsors own them, which I think we'll all remember back in the day there was the battery company that sponsored the Hancock and Hamill duel.
Exide, Team Exide. Yeah.
I think back in the day teams like that, but in general terms, the riders own the bikes in this country.
Can I be back to you? Do riders get paid a mileage allowance to get to meetings?
Yeah, they do, don't they? They get paid, and it is an allowance. I think in our day, going back years ago, it used to cover your travel it used to be down as travel expenses. Now it is called, I believe, an allowance. So they do contribute so much towards your cost of getting there and your fuel. I think for so many riders, the good riders, obviously, it'll cover their allowance. They will get paid whatever, but the lesser riders, possibly it'll cost them to get to a meeting.
It's something like tuppence halfpenny a mile, Nigel, isn't it? Something in that.
No,
area.
that's what we got. That's what we got paid, Derek. Tuppence halfpenny.
That sounds about right.
Back in the 50s.
And the final question, if you don't mind, if you fail to score, do you really get paid nothing at all, Andy?
Well, that happened to me quite a bit, really, back in the day. But if you fail to score, most of the riders are on a small guarantee, so it kind of covers their expenses on the way there and all that sort of thing. So, it's not a huge amount, but it just means that they're not out of pocket.
Yeah, thank you very much. A former Coventry rider answering your final question. Al, listen, thanks again for getting in touch, and we're super excited and proud to have a New Zealand fan club.
Yeah, send us some more questions, Al. Great to speak to you.
Great pal.
Cheers, Al.